Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm the co-owner and managing director with Impetus Digital. For those of you who do not know what Impetus Digital is, our company has built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration tools for life science companies. We enable companies to be able to collaborate, to share, to do work with their customers, physicians, payers, patients, and allied healthcare providers in a myriad of different work ventures through things like advisory boards, investigator meetings, co-author working groups, and medical education. Since the COVID-19, we've also been helping companies virtualize their internal brand planning, POA rollouts to field forces, etc. At Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. Sometimes those conversations can unfurl very big, hairy, audacious ideas that are going to truly help to positively disrupt healthcare. And this is one of these conversations that we are hoping to open up, a conversation with Richie, some of these things that we haven't thought about before, that we're going to be using things like the COVID-19 pandemic as a change accelerant for some of these things that we could potentially see as a positive lining in what we're doing. So this is the intention behind these different conversations, these fireside chats. And I'm also the Toronto chapter lead for the transformative technology community. And this community is really here as a way to bolster and affirm and to support the ecosystem of entrepreneurs, small startup businesses in the neurotech, well-being, human flourishing business. And the hope behind this community is to affect the lives of 1 billion people by the year 2030. So I'm very pleased and happy to have Richie Bavasso with us today. He has a very, very interesting and very robust background and an incredibly impressive career. He has a long history in the public relations and marketing functions, and he started his career at Yale New Haven Hospital, followed by Middlesex Hospital. He then actually went on to become the CEO, so that's actually really great. You go from public relations to becoming the CEO of a company, but only Richie could do that. And started heading up PharmaMedica Incorporated, which he built to become the 25th largest medical education company in the world. He also then went to co-found Exploria SPS. This was the first major software vendor that was introducing field force automated detailing and intelligent content logic to pharma's commercial sales operations. So there's always the first, and it normally starts with Richie. So Rich was also the chief commercial officer for Insightful, where he supported strategies to assess the role of robotics in automated pill dispensing. And he then later went on to co-found Remedia. Now this was a performance-based risk share contract sales organization. So as many of you know who are in the life sciences space, this is now the norm. But being a pioneer in that space is truly exceptional. Rich has been in several board positions, including RxVantage and the International MedTech and Digital Medicine Trade Development in the Americas. Today, or 4 years ago, he co-founded nQMedical, which is the company he's still operating today. We're going to talk about that. Obviously, he has very robust and background as well that led him to where he is today. And this company builds powerful machine learning solutions to support the continuum of neurological health. So welcome, Richie, to our Courageous Conversations Fireside Chat. Really happy to have you here today.
Thank you. And in the spirit of being ready for Zoom meetings, it looks like I have a beanie on my head. So for those of you on the call, thank you for your backgrounds.
Love it. So we've had a conversation before, so I feel like I kind of know you. But for those people who don't, a very impressive background, Richie. So tell us a little bit about what caused the fire in your belly to create some of these pioneering, pie-in-the-sky things that never existed before. What drove you to go from public relations and marketing into running companies? What was some of that history that you can recall?
Well, the two primary drivers. I hated public relations. Hated it. Did not like that world. Didn't like where you were in the pecking order. You were always the low man in the totem pole. And so that was an easy change. But more importantly, I think my entire life I've been a problem solver. I mean, I have this ability to fix things. I look at them, assess them, whether it's a lawnmower or a plumbing problem, and certainly as time has gone on to business problems. So when I see, a solution that's broad and challenging for an industry, I just tend to delve in and figure out from different perspectives and from the less obvious perspectives how we can solve that problem.
I love this. This actually fits really nicely. I'm sure you probably follow a lot of the social media marketing gurus that have grown up with us over the past, like Marie Forleo, who recently wrote a book called Everything is Figure Outable. Would you actually say that that is kind of your mindset when you say that you look at things and you figure them out? Do you look at them as a problem to be solved? Do you see that as a challenge, or what goes through your mind when you see these, when you've seen in the past that this is a problem? How did you approach those?
Yeah, I think everything's an opportunity. I mean, you think about building a business, it's all about, large numbers of people spending large amounts of money to buy whatever service or product you're offering. So if you can solve a problem that plagues many, then you're halfway towards a commercial success. I think the other thing to look at is, if you remember back in the days of 3M and looking at things from the paradigm differently, and I always recall in that particular book, there was they wanted to build a car that was gas efficient, had many miles to the gallon. So they went to this oceanography engineering school, and they built a car that actually ran on water pressure. Now, if you'd go to Detroit and asked them to build a car, you would have got something like a car that ran on gasoline and might have got marginally better mileage. But because, a different perspective, a whole different group looked at this for the first time, they saw something completely different, opportunity very different. So
it's really interesting that you say that, Richie, because when you ask people historically, like Ford from Ford Motor Company back in the early 20th century, what is a car? What would you ask it as a car at the time when people were still riding buggy and horse? Like you were saying, if you ask people what's a better vehicle, they would just say a faster horse or something with bigger wheels. Very similar to what Steve Jobs used to say is sometimes you have to be careful with market research because people can only see what they know.
Yes.
So
yes. That applies very much so to doctors. Going to doctors for market research, I find that they're not good at telling you what they really need because they're just bound by too many biases.
So when we're talking to this ecosystem of new thinkers, innovative thinkers, and people who might have been affected by COVID-19, who may have to reconsider their business model or consider completely repivoting their company, what kinds of advice would you give to people about thinking almost like that Johari window of, I don't know what I don't know? Mm-hmm. What sort of tips and tricks? I know it's probably so built into your own system or your own internal psyche that it's called quiet knowingness, so it's hard to articulate. But what would be some of those nuggets that you would share if you were to teach somebody how to think differently? So how to get beyond what's already been manifested and to really get into the world of imagination?
Yeah, that's a challenging, not being opportunity specific, but I mean, one door closes, the other one opens. And if you spend too much time worrying about what you can no longer do, then you're going to miss an opportunity, which you can do. In my particular case, and we chatted about this, COVID has both hurt my business and helped my business considerably. I'm in the remote patient monitoring space. And for decades, there's been this reluctance to do telehealth, telemedicine. Clinicians weren't really adopting it. Patients didn't really know how to consume it. And payers, probably the biggest factor, wouldn't pay for it. Well, overnight, that all changed with COVID. And it was no longer a matter of, what's the appropriate solution. Zoom became, a forum for administering medical advice. So it hurt me in that in doing clinical trials, it impacted my ability to recruit patients for the trial. However, all the patients I had enrolled in the trial we got a continuation of data because we were monitoring them remotely. So I think for us, only positive things are going to come out of this catastrophic event that's impacted so many. And we're going to pivot in that direction.
Beautiful. And I want to come back to the details on that as it relates to clinical trials, because that's a big component of the success of nQMedical. But maybe we can just take a step back for a moment and really go back to the days 4 years ago when you moved from from being a CEO of another company and jumping into the next opportunity. Can you kind of recount the days of who you met with? How did the opportunity express itself to you? And then how did you end up getting into this new company?
Well, I was semi-retired, and I was pretty much done with my career. And I was approached by an entity that was representing this particular laboratory at MIT. The School of Biomedical Engineering had some IP that they had created, and they'd not had a lot of success commercializing anything in this particular laboratory. So I was recruited to come in and look at it. At first, I was incredulous. I mean, we haven't talked about what this technology is yet, but essentially being able to detect neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and track disease progression from how you use your device, whether your phone, your laptop, or your desktop. So just your finger-brain connection or interacting with that device reveals an enormous amount of data. So I looked at it for the first time and said, no way, that's crazy. I mean, it's just voodoo medicine. But MIT had spent 6 years of clinical trials and published in 5 peer-reviewed papers. So this was real serious technology and medicine. And one thing I knew from my history and learning the hard way, you can't go to market and say, look at my technology. I get this great technology. Wouldn't you want to buy my technology? No one cares. No one cares about your technology. Please just stop talking about it. What problem are you solving, and who is it benefiting? Who's your target audience, and will they write a check, and how big will they write the check for? I mean, those are the ways you should be focusing on in terms of your company. The technology is, it's particularly my technology, which is invisible because you already own an nQMedical device. Everybody on this call is using an nQMedical device. We just have an AI application that you download and you never see it again. There's no user interface. There's nothing. It's just tracking in the background, much the same way Google and Apple do. They track everything you touch, all your keystroke dynamics. I'm not sure what they do with it, but we translate it into clinical data that can help clinicians, as I mentioned, detect disease early and track disease progression over time, and actually measure therapeutic intervention. So during that progression, if I introduce a drug therapy or device therapy, is it having an impact?
So you were approached from some of these researchers at MIT. Did they ask you for your opinion? Were they asked, did they have you pinpointed as this really amazing marketing guru and said, we want you as the CEO?
I don't know.
Did you just say, I want to be the CEO of this company?
No, I was new to the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Boston. I spent most of my career in Connecticut, New York. And I was fairly new. That you mentioned that robotics company. That was my first entry into Massachusetts and actually doing some work. And I think somehow, some way, they got hold of my name. I honestly never pursued why. So I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. And do you have other co-founders, other people that are heading up the company? Tell us a little bit about the dynamics of what it makes and what's the right chemistry for being in business with other people in a so-called startup.
My co-founder, Mark Pasquarella, is a brilliant technology entrepreneur. He was the one that actually shook the trees and uncovered the opportunity at MIT and did most of the contracting to get the access to that technology. We've licensed it worldwide. And the balance between us is great because he understands what he doesn't know and I understand what I don't know. His background is heavy in technology and introducing software and hardware. Mine has been in healthcare for 30 years. So I understand the stakeholders, I understand the methodology of how purchases are made. I've been in everything from hospitals and healthcare, which is so completely different than pharmaceuticals and biosciences, which I thought would have been like a minor little skip. But it's almost like electrical engineering and brain surgery. It's that far apart in how they approach the market. Even though the acronyms very often are the same. So you'll hear an acronym, you got to figure out, okay, is that an acronym for pharma? Or is that the same acronym for healthcare? Because it has different meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I mean, what happens in life sciences is not necessarily what the entire healthcare scope looks like. And even though it's considered all healthcare, they can be they're very different dynamics.
You know, if you mind, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I
Yeah,
just an anecdote comes to mind here. Technology companies versus life science companies. I mean, if I think about an exit for my company, you know, I look at this dynamic of you've got Apple, Google, Amazon, you know, over here who are buying into life sciences rapidly and aggressively, and then you've got pharma, CVS, health systems who are investing in technology rapidly, and so they, you know, they're banging together. So, you know, which is my exit? Um, and I think technology companies have a really hard time understanding or appreciating the slow pace of healthcare, the slow pace of change, the slow pace of adoption, the slow pace of even approval. And I'll give you an anecdote that I think you'll appreciate. So early on, we were trying to raise funds for the money, for the company around 2017. You know, we'd go to a Massachusetts-based VC and we tell a story, something like this. We've got this technology, it's been well vetted at MIT, you know, MIT, right? It's a great selling point. It's been through 6 clinical trials and published review, and you know, we're going to continue to publish more and invest more in R&D. We're going to seek regulatory clearance through the FDA. We'll do the same thing in other countries, and then we'll educate doctors on how to use it, and then we'll disseminate to patients. And everyone in Boston's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, you got it. You're doing it right." Fly to the West Coast. Start sitting down with some of these Silicon Valley people. Tell the same story. They're like, "Screw the FDA. I don't give a crap about evidence. You know, put an ad in the Super Bowl, get 10 million people to download this thing, and we'll figure the rest out later." And because of my background, I couldn't do that. I mean, because I just had this vision in my mind where a patient's going to walk into the doctor's office and say, "Hey, doc, I downloaded this app. Look at all this unbelievable data." And the doctor's going to say, "What is that crap? Get out of here." And I never heard of it. So that gives you some background how, you know, two parties, and my partner and Mark have done very well of you know, learning from each other.
yeah, no, it's very interesting. And even within the same country, I mean, it's a mindset, and you almost have to regionalize your messaging.
Mm-hmm.
So taking a step back into the founding of it, was there a process up front once you had licensed this, licensed this from MIT and you were ready to go? Was there a process that you went through around getting it funded? Do you have a lot? I mean, and was this easier for you to do just based on all of your previous history? Tell us a little bit about what the
Sure.
funding process was for you.
Yeah. Well, we did a lot of the normal things. We became a Delaware corporation. You know, we put a board together, and we began to establish our business plan. Obviously, those are some of the obvious things. And then because we didn't know who was going to buy that, I couldn't answer that question. Who's going to write the check? So we took 2 years and my partner and I, and our own money, and we went out into talked to as many stakeholders as we could, from payers to doctors to pharma companies, medical device companies, health systems. And we just wanted to learn, you know, who's going to buy this thing. Because unlike a lot of companies, I believe a startup should make money. I mean, I don't understand these companies that go years and years and years without any revenue or you know, any profit. It just, I don't know, maybe I'm old school. So we said, okay, how can we bring cash in the door quickly to fund this company? Because obviously to raise money, you lose equity. So our goal was not to lose equity. So we did. We brought some. We found out what our, you know, Genesis Qua was, and we started getting revenue. And then now we're in a growth mode. So the platform is built. We're on a regulatory pathway. We're staffing the company, yet it's not going fast enough. So this is when we realized capital is required. And I think any company on this call really has to look hard at where you are in the cycle, particularly when you talk to investors. They are not in the business of helping you build your platform, you know, helping you find customers. They want to know basically one thing. I'm going to invest $1 in this company. Well, 2 things. How much am I going to get as a return and when? That's what they want to know. They don't care about anything else about your company. You know, you give them $1, I'm going to give you $3 in 2 years. Great. Okay, I'll invest. And also when you're a startup and you're still trying to prove yourself, you're high risk. So the line of investors is not very long. You know, there are specific companies that do seed investing. And even there, they're picky because there's so many opportunities to invest. Once you cross that threshold where you've been able to check off the boxes, You have customer, you have revenues, your regulatory process, blah, blah, blah. Your platforms is no longer a minimal viable product. It's actually, beyond, it's gold. Then the line becomes very long. Everyone wants to be part of your Series A, which is where we are right now. We're gearing up for a Series A. And I'm telling you, it's not going to be difficult because so many people, we've de-risked the company to this point. So I think the biggest advice I would give to anybody starting a company is truly understand what an investor is interested in. And it's not the same story that you would tell a potential customer.
It's really interesting. You said so many really important things there, and I just want to linger on a few of them. One of the things I thought was really interesting that what you said is it sounded like, based on your experience with multiple companies, that you started or founded this company right away asking yourself, how am I going to exit? That is not normally a question that people will ask, but it sounds like that was one of the number one questions, and you already had the end in mind as part of the plan. And so I also think that you brought up a really important idea around de-risking and actually creating an operating company, which again, for the longest time was not really the sexy thing. In Silicon Valley, it was okay to have a highly unprofitable company and still and we know that whole, milieu and that whole thinking has completely changed since COVID. But with all of that said, you also said that you're running a Series A. This is not difficult for you to raise the money. So besides the fact that you're well attuned, you started off with the end in mind, you asked yourself right away, it had all of that set up a profitable revenue generating company and de-risked it. Where does COVID-19 fit into this Series A? Do you think that accelerated or optimized your ability now to be able to easily fund this? Where does that play out, and what advice would you have to leverage this momentum right now?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 is severely hurting companies in the seed stage. I think because they're high risk. And I think the market hates unknown. And right now, healthcare is a big unknown. No, I could sit here and say telemedicine is robust, remote patient monitoring is robust, because that's what appears to be the case today. I have no idea if that's going to revert. One thing about healthcare, and the reason it's so expensive, is people make a lot of money in healthcare. And everybody who's making money wants to hold on to that piece. Even if you're a dinosaur, they reticent to relinquish their piece, and they want more. So I think as a startup organization, they're really suffering because investors need to keep their capital to keep the current portfolio companies operating through this time. I mean, I honestly don't think we're going to see the end of COVID for another 24 months. And I think it's a long, long road. And if you haven't got capital to survive that, good companies are going to go out of business. So that being said, I'm fortunately, very fortunately, not in that space. And I think you have to ask yourself, what safe harbors, what safe havens are the investors looking for? I mean, what can they invest their money in and have a lower risk and a higher rate of return? And strategic also, I think at this point in time, I mentioned the line around the door for Series A, I get to pick now. Whereas I would have taken any investor, I don't care, and Genghis Khan when I was in my seed stage. But now I can say, okay, who's the right kind of investor to me? Who's going to get me to my exit? Is it going to be a farmer venture fund? Is it going to be the Amazon Alexa fund? Could it be Samsung? Or could it be just an institutional investor who's got their hands in everything? That's a big part of our process now. Who do we want to get in bed with?
And it really brings up another interesting question for people who may not have the same level of experience as you, as they pick and choose. Some of them may have that luxury, and some may, like you said, just pick anybody that's actually going to donate some money. But you actually said something that was really important, and that is they have the end in mind as well. They're not there to help do any major, problem solving, sitting there with you when you've worked the 14-hour day and you're still sweating it out at midnight and trying to figure out how you're going to be overcoming, certain competitors or whatever, or there's a major issue with your algorithm. So tell us a little bit about, the good, bad, and the ugly of somebody deciding either about bootstrapping and finding out some other mechanisms for funding versus going the route of this, because it is an accelerant. but there are some things, some people say it's almost like selling your soul to the devil. What is that experience like, and what sort of nuggets would you give for pearls of wisdom would you give for people as they're considering their options?
Yeah, a big one. And I do a lot of work with the government of Scotland. I support digital health companies in Scotland to come to the U.S. and set up operations. So I'm not only knee deep in it with my own company. There's a plethora of companies that I get involved in, and they all suffer from the same thing. They all want the same thing. But I think my first caution is the incubators and accelerators that are prolific in the country. There are thousands of them. And some of them, offer some really good services. And some of them take way too much equity, in my opinion. And if I'm desperate for, and the cash contributions are too small. So if I'm desperate for cash, I might be in a position that my only option is this accelerator, and they want 20% of my company for $100,000, which is way out of proportion in my mind. So I think my advice to companies is really look hard, and the equity in your company, your ownership of the company is the most valuable thing. I'd rather not eat for a month than give up 1% of my company, because in the back end, you'll get payback. So I think that's one of my big cautions to companies is be very careful about who you partner with, because you're going to get 6, 8, 10 weeks of support. And I can already tell you what the agenda is going to be. They're going to show you a lawyer who's paid to be there. They're going to show you an accountant who's paid to be there. They're going to show you different pieces of what looks like a business plan, a business model. There might be 1 or 2 potential customers. There might be 1 or 2 potential partners. But you got to realize also that one class might have 20 companies in it. And if there are 20,000 incubators, they're all going to go after that same customer. So be very, very careful in that regard.
Yeah, no, I think very important. You also brought up an interesting thing about the melding and the meshing of different industries into the same pool. So consumer electronic companies melding in with what big pharma and life sciences, and everybody's going for the same fish.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're kind of delving into this, we just heard even recently that there's a lot of scrutiny on antitrust. Apple there's some questions going on in Europe around what they're doing. I think ultimately there's a lot of pressure coming from the ecosystem of small entrepreneurs wanting to get their fair share and wanting to break up some of these monopolies. In this environment of antitrust and big monopolies, and is there opportunity to try to do this on your own? I mean, should we all just give up and say Amazon is going to take over the world? Like, what is your philosophy on what's going on around us?
God. And I mean, I'm an N of 1, and I'm biased. When I think about technology companies, I think about healthcare and say, okay, who do I want to have my data? Who do I want to know that I had an appendectomy, that I maybe had cancer? The healthcare system and healthcare companies have a long history of protecting your data. Long history. They be pharma companies or hospital systems, and they're highly regulated in that regard. Not so much on the technology side. Even though it's alluring to look at a technology company that can give me an Apple Watch and tell me if I'm going to have some arrhythmia, okay. But again, where's my data going? And are they going to stick with me? So if they don't sell enough Apple Watches to do arrhythmia, maybe they'll just stop servicing that line, and I've got nothing. And they'll create something else. So I think, and on the other hand, the tech companies are in a far better position to do what I call the digital front door of medicine. We're not going back, in my opinion. I don't think we're going to go back on what we've learned in COVID, because we learned the hard way. So I think this digital front door, I'm not sure life science companies are in a place where they can take advantage of it and optimize it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be very interesting, like you said, in the next 24 months. I think you're going to see a lot of movement of money, a lot of purchasing from foreign nationals, and there's going to be a melding and mashing. I think there's going to be this globalization. Although we talk about regionalization and localization and buy American or buy Canadian, I think that there equally is going to be this heavy weight around globalization and a capturing of companies from international. So I think it's going to be very interesting in the next 2 years.
Well, you asked me. I'm sorry. Let me just finish one other thought. You've asked me a question
Absolutely.
about should the startup just give up? And when I look at my own company, and even in the early days, we have 6 years worth of data. We've done all these. We've made an investment that you could argue Apple could do that. Apple or Google, they just throw $100 million or something. But we have a saying at NQ that keeps us going. And to answer that question, 9 women can't make a baby in a month. And essentially, yes, you could be Google or Apple and jump into this space and try to be dominant, but we've got a huge head start. And the smarter play for Google or Apple would be to acquire us, which is, again, part of my exit strategy. But I think if you can be the absolute best at what you're doing, even if it's a tiny piece of the pie, then you'll get the visibility you need to move on.
I talk a lot about this. I teach a little program called systems thinking. And so when we look at healthcare, like as this systems, as design thinking, as this big holistic monolith, entity, is what I see the small startups and the companies like yours. I don't think it's a small one, but is your problem solving in all of these different components, and then incorporating that into the entire system to create that holistic change. So I think that there is a positive silver lining to this, but I do think that there's an acquiring component. And so I also believe that having the end in mind, having an exit strategy versus, and some people may actually plan to be an operating company for years and years and years, but, and there's a time and place for that as well too. But it is a very smart idea to have the exit in mind as well. So maybe we can actually just backtrack for those people who do not know what nQMedical does. We've kind of alluded to it. Maybe you can describe what it is that your company does and what makes it unique.
Okay, so first off, what makes us unique is we're collecting sensor data that is not being collected by too many parties. If you think of sensors, you think of facial recognition, voice recognition, accelerometer, GPS. I mean, all your devices deliver data to other parties every day. And the other thing too about privacy, there's no privacy. It doesn't exist. Apple and Google know everything about you. And even when you're not interacting with a device, they know what you're going to do because you've done it before. So forget privacy. But anyway, to my earlier point, so we have this unique repository of keystroke data, we call it. And we've built proprietary algorithms to translate that keystroke data into tools that can help us manage different diseases. So then the next part of that was, okay, how do we operationalize that? And we established some basic principles for ourselves. One is we will always be passive. Okay, we're never going to have an app that asks you a question: how you feeling today? Did you take your drug? We're not going to do that. We want complete anonymity that we even exist, and we want you to live your life. We want it to be real world data. So if you're on LinkedIn all day, great. If you play video games, if you type letters to your grandma, we want you to live your life with our tools. And that's hard because very often we'll meet with a customer who will say, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if you put a patient diary on this thing? Wouldn't it be great if the patient could tell you what drugs they're taking?" And we resist that. And it's a hard place to be when there's money being dangled. So we resist absolutely. And also we resist this proprietary device knowledge because devices change constantly. Apple upgrades their phone constantly. Android, there's thousands of different Android devices out there. For me to introduce a proprietary device and compete with the manufacturers of the world is absolutely crazy. So this brain-finger connection, interacting with a device, gives us data like hold time, the amount of time your finger's depressed, flight time, time between touches, pressure, frequency of backspace, spaces between words and sentences. None of this is giving us information, personal data. It's just how you're interacting with the device. And we've been able to translate that going up against the gold standard diagnostic tools into a viable tool. So the second part of where we are now is how do we distribute this? And we've opted to distribute it through pharmaceutical companies and health systems and payers, as opposed to doing it independently. So I hope I never have to hire a salesperson. I never have to invest in a marketing campaign. I'm basically going to white license my product to someone who can use it to further their own business interests.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about IP. for companies. So it sounds to me like you have a very strong strategy around that because your business model is built around licensing.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell, I mean, obviously we're not going to get into any proprietary discussion here, but just high level pearls of wisdom, insights on how to go about doing that. Like if you have something that's algorithmic, that's very special, being able to bypass sales and marketing and all of the stuff that takes gargantuous amounts of time, that's a very special type of process and a very
Mm-hmm.
intriguing one potentially for some people. What would you suggest people do to think about that and how to go about, getting IP?
Yeah. I'll be honest, it's not an area I'm a superb expert. I only know by, we used to call it the MBWA, management by walking around. You learn. I think that you have your core IP strategy that protects your investment. And for example, our algorithms are what's important. We're not trying to patent anything to do with a device because it's outside the realm of what we own. But I will say that it's very important to look ahead. And a lot about patent protection is not protecting what's back here, but what's protecting what's over here. And I'll give you an example. So we have there are 2 patents in the US and 3 pending in Europe, UK, to protect our core business processes and our core algorithms. However, we're noticing a trend. The trend is very simple. No one sensor can do everything. So is my keystroke dynamic sensor plus voice recognition the best combination for disease A? Is accelerometer plus facial recognition the best combination for disease B, and so on. So we're moving our IP in that direction to look down the road where we are no longer the sole sensor, where we're we call it the matrix approach. We're part of a matrix. And that will require different algorithms and different thought processes that we want to be able to protect.
Got it. So you're saying that you're almost like throwing in nQMedical's algorithm into almost like a data pool or a sensor pool, like a marketplace,
Right.
where somebody else really smart is going to build another company with amalgamation of all of those sensors to create something else. Is that
Correct.
what you're suggesting?
Yeah,
So
you
become a building block.
Correct. I mean, there are many instances of companies who've patented a product, and then another company completely separate patented another product, but no one's ever thought about putting them together, and that's patentable. The person who has said, I'm going to put A and B together and own that processes, et cetera. So that's where I think we're heading.
Yeah. So as you talk about, going directly to the pharma and to payers, are these partnerships or are these part of your funding round to kind of get you to that? So there's a difference between partners and funding and somebody who's ultimately going to, is this just going to be a forever and a day licensing opportunity, or what is that exit going to look like? Who's ultimately going to own this thing?
Well, one of the exit strategies is we become an annuity. We just generate cash and we all live happily ever after off that cash. That is one of the strategies. Currently, all of my clients who have venture funds, we're not accessing those venture funds. So they're paying for a service, which obviously is non-dilutable. So that's positive for us. I know that the agreements we have with these entities have what they call escalation clauses, where at a point in time, they reserve the option to either A, talk about acquisition, B, talk about some kind of venture investment, and so on. Those are down the road, but in writing in our agreements. So even though the project may be small now, we've already thought ahead about what's going to happen if we're successful. I mean, if this particular trial for concussion, we're doing a concussion trial right now, or for ALS, or for MS, these are all new diseases for us. There's huge interest in the outcome of those trials. So people have basically bought options on that.
Right. So the intention of doing clinical trials, let's actually just look at that more from a regulatory standpoint. There's a whole new area under the FDA and other, NIH, et cetera, under new medical devices and regulations around that, and a whole expanding area around prescriptive digital therapeutics or diagnostics. So is that kind of the intention, or is the intention of doing the clinical trials more so to de-risk your product, to make it feel like there's a demand without you having to go down the marketing and sales route?
Well, okay, so you could be a consumer product, and a toy, health entertainment, I call it, and you have to worry about any of that clinical or regulatory proof points. And, then you have to worry about who's going to buy it and whether they're going to pay for it. There's class 1 medical devices where it's a little less rigid, a little less requirement on the data. And then there's class 2 that if you ultimately want to make a claim to be used by a doctor or consumed by a patient, you have to achieve this level of regulatory clearance, and you can't get there without data. You have to prove that your indication for use has, valid data behind it. And that's the route we've chosen to take. Longer route, more painful route, but I think ultimately it gives us competitive advantage, and it gives us an easier uptake on purchase. So if a pharma company wants to use it for a trial and it's pre-FDA clearance, they'll debate whether they want to do that or not because the trial is expensive. Post-FDA clearance, the debate will be much briefer, and the risk for them is lower, and so on down the chain of healthcare stakeholders.
So where are you in the clinical trial route? Are you at a phase 2, phase 3? And is your ultimate goal to receive clearance and FDA approval and then actually get into the public, the Medicaid, Medicare system so that it's automatically paid for? Is that sort of your regulatory strategy? Or yes, where are you in the clinical trial process?
Well, our initial submission to the FDA is for Parkinson's disease. We have all the data we need. Those are all done. All those clinical trials are finished. So we got breakthrough status last November. We submitted for software as a medical device, SAMD, and we anticipate clearance in October, which would then, raise our profile and allow us to talk to payers and the like for Parkinson's. Now we're filing de novo, which means the FDA has come back. We initially filed with a predicate, and the FDA came back and says, no, there's no one else like you. I'm sorry, you can't use a predicate, which is a loophole, by the way, that the FDA had. They're trying to close. Because if I can compare myself to a device that was built in 1924, then basically it expedites my approval. And they know that's a problem. So anyway, we filed de novo, so that's very positive in terms of us being recognized as first in class. And then at the end of that clearance, by the way, it's not approval, it's clearance, we will file using ourselves as our own predicate. So we'll say, okay, you approve this for Parkinson's. Here's new data for Alzheimer's disease. Okay, it's the same platform doing the same things, but the algorithm is a little bit different. So now we want to be approved for Alzheimer's, for ALS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, when we met with Bakul Patel at the FDA, who runs the digital health division, back in 2018, they had a problem that they shared with us. They said, we don't know how to regulate a machine learning algorithm that changes every day after launch. It's like a pill, right? You approve the pill, you approve the chemical entity. It doesn't change by itself when people are consuming it. Yeah. So we actually wrote a white paper that became part of their guidance on how they could actually do that. At what point could they require that you have to come back and get new approval? At what point can you say, this is just improving your ability to detect the thing we've already approved? And so that was a learning exercise for both of us at the same time.
That is fascinating, and that's the first time I've heard that. Very, very truly, I would love to get access. Is that white paper public or?
Oh, sure, I can send it to you.
I love it. That is brilliant and very interesting. I've never heard that before. So when we think about this, so obviously neurodegenerative diseases is kind of what your focus is on. What is the next steps? I mean, there's obviously a lot of other things. Is there a bigger picture, or are you hoping to exit before you start to go into other disease areas?
Well, I don't know. I can't answer the latter question, but I can tell you that we've had conversations and we've done quote unquote hypothesis for stroke, for carpal tunnel syndrome, for arthritis, and a bunch of other diseases that people have come to us and said, hey, do you do anything in this area? Well, we have no data. Here's our hypothesis. Do you want to invest in the study to find out? And some have, and some have not.
And so when you talk about licensing, let's just say there's multiple very large pharmaceutical medical device companies that have a real vested interest in this particular therapeutic space. So do they just license the software and build their own thing? How do they partner with you? Is there exclusivity?
My first answer to exclusivity is always no.
Okay.
And I would advise anybody to say no, unless the check is, 9 zeros. So I think that exclusivity is something that restriction, another way to approach exclusivity is say, okay, I'll give you a slice. I will give you motor for ALS, but you cannot have fatigue for ALS. You can't have cognition for ALS. So you kind of divide it up. Because obviously what you want is multiple customers writing you big checks. So I guess next for us is really today, for the next 3 to 5 years, is really to get as much close to the brain health platform as we can, which means multi-disease. Get through the regulatory processes so we own some space, get through some IP for the same reason, and put ourselves in a position where, people are coming to us and saying, we want you to be part of our organization, and we don't want anybody else to have it. That's more the question. We want it because it advances our business interests, and it's worth X for us to get you out of the market so nobody else can have it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that would be an Amazon play.
Perhaps. It could be a drug company play.
Right. No, it could be.
So, we are the largest drug in multiple sclerosis, and this is going to help us stay that way. So we don't want to be able to have access to it. I mean, that's a facetious. It could be.
Yeah. You brought up a very, very important topic, and this one is going to go on for years and years and years to come. And this is the whole thing around data privacy. We hear it in a lot of different forms: data security, healthcare ownership versus sharing. What does that look like? What does it mean? I know that your belief is healthcare data security doesn't exist. At the same time, not getting political about it, but there's a whole other, there's whole other regions, geographies where people are concerned about surveillance and, a whole sort of other things that are happening. Are those conversations that are happening between you and these particular organizations? How are you engaging in these bioethic concerns? And are patients getting involved in these discussions?
We are purposely asking patients to get involved in the discussions because they're the least knowledgeable about what data is and how it's protected. And I think if we can cross that threshold, then we can satisfy people who are more in the know. We built our platform in 2 specific ways. One, we don't consume identified data. We only consume de-identified data. So if you enroll and have the NQ application on your platform, we only know you as number G6475A. That's all we know. All your private data remains in your EMR or in EDC for a clinical trial or some other entity. We're just passing on a diagnostic test, the results of a diagnostic test. So that's one. On the other hand, as we advance down the road, and perhaps someday we do become a direct-to-consumer application or some hybrid version of that, we believe strongly that patients should have access to their own data, and that the patient should decide who can see it. So we've constructed our application to say, okay, Natalie, this is your application. Here's your dashboard. You're the only person that can see it, but if you want to share it with other people, here's how you can do that.
Is that based on a blockchain process, so for complete transparency and ownership in the process, or is that something that you're considering getting data on some sort of a distributed ledger?
Now you're way above my pay grade in technology. I certainly know what those are, but I don't know what direction we've gone. I don't think it's blockchain because I would have heard that in our product development meetings, but I can't answer that question.
Yeah, there's people who actually believe at some point there can be probably a democratization and the monetization of data.
Monetization for sure, yes.
A big way to do that would be through blockchain, so that anytime somebody is leveraging your data in whatever format, either in pool or encrypted or not, that you would actually get a little bit of payment for that. So yes, that is probably sometime in the future. But
there's a company doing that now called Humanity. Who believes in that strongly, is trying to facilitate that remuneration for your data.
Yeah, no, I love it for sure. And I also really love your idea about the kind of the mesh, if you will, of these kinds of technologies all going into some sort of a sensor pool. And again, the big question is going to be, what is that sensor pool going to do, and how does that fit into surveillance at some point, especially when we start talking about facial recognition, et cetera. But so very interesting concept. There's a couple of questions here that have come in. I just want to quickly close up. Somebody was asking you about tracking the effectiveness of neurostem treatments for Parkinson's. Is that something that nQMedical is specific? Do you focus on that? Is there studies on that?
Well, okay, good question. And if I could show you a slide, I'd show you how we track a therapeutic intervention. We may not know what that intervention is, but the physician and the clinician in the hospital knows what it is. All we can show is you're showing, a significant level of symptoms for Parkinson's, for example. Your bradykinesia, et cetera, is at a high level of variance and showing, high symptoms of disease. There's an intervention, whether it be a deep brain stimulator, or whether it be a drug intervention, whether it be cognition behavioral therapy, and if we can show if it's having an impact on your symptoms. So no, we don't look specifically at stem cell treatments, but we know that an intervention is having, we can articulate and show the impact of that intervention on the symptoms that a patient has.
So he was mentioning neurostim, but it sounds like it's along the same lines.
Yeah, DBS, deep brain stimulation. Actually, a lot of our studies with deep brain stimulation patients, when they transition from drug therapy alone through their insertion of the electrodes to the tracking the stimulation, we have specific data on that.
Beautiful. Now, how do you foresee your product being prescribed? Do you see this as being like a digital pharmacy somewhere? How is it currently being prescribed, and what do you think the future looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you really want to see a great model, look to the German model. Germany has put together a digital health formulary. It's funded by their payers. The payers are required to allocate 5% of their revenues, costs, whatever, to pay these young digital health startups to get reimbursement. So basically, they've built an incubator in their own country so that if I'm a German startup and I can go to USA and say I've got 3,000 doctors, I've earned 3 million euros of worth of revenue in Germany, so I've already kind of been tested. I'm going to export that to the US now. And I think we suffer here in the US not having a national digital formulary. I'm seeing proprietary formularies popping up all over the country. Some are driven by health systems, some are driven by third parties, such as myself. But we need to get there for two reasons. A, so that the apps that are available for patient care are vetted, through scrutinized appropriately, and also so that we have some form of payment. Because if we're benefiting society, then we need to survive.
Yeah.
As opposed to some of the ways we're doing it now through VC money.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting that you're helping incubator companies in Ireland wanting to come to the US. Scotland. I think that's a whole other conversation about why they'd want to be doing that, considering how challenging that is. But that's probably another conversation. Mm-hmm. But where do you see payers coming in and reimbursing telehealth? Where does this fit into this part of this whole equation around becoming the new standard of care?
Well, legislatively, recently, because of COVID, they're required to pay for a virtual visit at the same rate as a live visit. So that's been a long time coming. Whether they'll pull back once COVID clears, we don't know. But I think that during this 12, 18-month, 24-month cycle, hopefully they'll get their actuaries working on, are they really saving money? Are they lowering cost of care? Are they improving outcomes? And all things they're interested in. Does that benefit them as well as benefit the patient? So I think that we're heading down the road where payers will voluntarily offer some type of reimbursement. Now, the CMS, the Medicare, has come up with about half a dozen RPM codes, remote patient monitoring codes, where they will reimburse for interventions, telemetry, and the like. And the numbers are already there. They're not big numbers, like $64 a month, whatever, but they're numbers, and it's moving in the right direction.
It's brilliant. This was a fascinating topic. Like I said, I could literally speak to you for hours. There's so many good stuff here that I would love to, but I just wanted to spend my time. Again, thank you for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule with me, Richie. Amazing, amazing stuff. I wish that we could be working with you because you're just like this wealth of knowledge. Thanks to our audience for coming to listen, and for all of those who are going to be hearing the recording afterwards. I will be sending the link to listen to that. So be on the lookout. Follow us on our social media channels. Thank you so much again, Richie.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
You too. You too.
Bye-bye.